The driveway hadn't changed in 20 years. Same gray stone, same leaning fence, same smell of hay and diesel off Derek's truck. I parked behind it, a crew cab with a unit sticker in the back window. A magnet on the tailgate read Ashworth Valor Foundation. That hadn't been there last year. I sat with my hands on the wheel a second longer than the drive required. 20 years of service teaches you to read a room before you're in it. I hadn't opened the car door yet, and I already didn't like the read. Brooke met me on the porch before I made it up the steps, clipboard under one arm, sunglasses pushed up into hair that had clearly seen a stylist that morning for an event that didn't start until evening. "Oh, Dana," she said it the way you'd greet a delivery that arrived a day early. "We didn't know if you'd actually come. Told Otis I would." "Right, of course. Well, the guest rooms are full." Derek's parents from the reunion committee, the Hendersons, 2 of the foundation board members, flew in from Charlotte. "We put a cot out in the equipment shed for you. It's got the good insulation, actually. Derek redid the wiring out there last spring." 20 years ago, this had been my house, too. I didn't say that. I picked up my own duffel bag before anyone could offer, which no one did, and carried it around the side of the house myself. The shed smelled the way it always had: cut grass gone stale, engine oil, the particular mustiness of a building that stores things nobody has decided to throw away. A workbench with a pegboard of tools nobody used anymore. A dead chest freezer repurposed for holding Christmas decorations. And in the far corner, half buried beneath a moving blanket someone had thrown over it years ago and never removed, an old olive drab field radio, a PRC something, the kind with a hand crank. The kind nobody had used operationally since before I was born. I knew whose it was without asking. My father collected radios the way some men collect photographs. Photographs lie about how good things were. Radios just carry whatever's actually on the frequency. I peeled the blanket back an inch, enough to see the dial, cracked glass over a needle that hadn't moved since Nixon was in office. Then I let the blanket fall back into place and set up my cot 6 feet away, boots aimed toward the door out of a habit 20 years hadn't broken. Some people get a guest room. I got a shed with better wiring than sentiment. It was, all things considered, an accurate metaphor for the weekend that was about to happen to me, and I hadn't even changed out of my travel clothes yet. Dinner ran long, the way these things always did. 20. Some people crowded around a table built for 12. Extra leaves wedged in, mismatched chairs dragged from 3 different rooms. Old friends of my father's from his signal battalion, a scattering of neighbors, 2 of the foundation's board members, making pleasant noise about tax deductions. And Cole slouched at the far end of the table with his phone in his lap, under the tablecloth, doing the thing every 17-year-old in America does at family functions he didn't choose to attend. Derek sat at the head of the table, my father's old seat. Nobody had said anything about that out loud, but everybody at the table had clocked it. The way you clock a picture hung slightly crooked and decide it isn't worth mentioning. He was telling a story. I recognized it before he finished the first sentence, the way you recognize a smell before you've placed the memory attached to it. "Command wanted eyes on the convoy route before first light," Derek said, turning his wine glass slowly by the stem, playing the room the way he'd always played rooms, and there was no satellite window for another 6 hours. So I made the call myself, cold, dark, radio silence the whole ride in. That's leadership. You make the call when nobody's watching, and you live with it either way. Somebody at the far end murmured something appreciative. Brooke was already looking at me, the way she always looked at me when Derek performed checking my face for cracks, the way you'd check a dam. I set my fork down. I knew those words. Not the general shape of a war story, the specific words. No satellite window for another 6 hours. That sentence existed in exactly one document I knew of, and I had written it myself in an after-action summary in the spring of 2019 about a night that had never once involved Derek. "Something wrong, Dana?" Brooke asked, sweet as a knife wrapped in a napkin. That's not how it happened. 9 words. Flat. The table went quiet for exactly as long as it takes a room full of people to collectively decide they'd rather not find out why. Derek smiled the smile that had gotten him out of trouble since he was 6 years old, the one that made whoever he aimed it at feel like they'd misheard something reasonable as something confrontational. How would you know? You were stateside that whole rotation. Cables and spreadsheets, right? He said it lightly, for the room, and the room laughed lightly with him, that soft, relieved laugh people produce when someone else has decided for them that the tension was only a joke after all. One of the Hendersons, an older man who'd served with my father decades earlier, leaned toward me with the friendly, oblivious tone of someone trying to include a quiet relative in the conversation. And what did you do over there, Dana? Derek's told us so much about the family service, but I don't think I've heard your part of it. Signals work, mostly stateside. Comms support, Derek added, before the man could ask a follow-up, patting my shoulder as he passed behind my chair, on his way to refill his glass, the gesture landing more like a period at the end of a sentence than any kind of warmth. Dana kept the phones running so the rest of us could focus on the mission. Important work in its own way. In its own way, 2 words doing a great deal of quiet demolition. A ripple of polite noddings went around the table, the kind people offer once they've been handed permission to stop being curious about something. I didn't answer. I picked my fork back up and finished my dinner in 11 more bites, counted without meaning to, the way you count things when you need somewhere else for your attention to go. But I already knew exactly where I'd heard that phrase the first time. And I already knew it hadn't come out of Derek's mouth then, either. Cold came up out of the concrete floor and sat in my boots no matter how many layers I put between us and it. Through the shed's one window, 200 feet of dark yard away, I could see the warm gold spill of the kitchen candles Brooke had lit for ambiance nobody needed, the extra bottle of Malbec Derek had opened for the board members from Charlotte. Somebody's laugh muffled soft through double-paned glass. 2 rooms, 2 temperatures, 20 feet of lawn and a lifetime between them. Before I called anyone, I did what I did every night, out of habit worn so deep it wasn't really a choice anymore. I unzipped the inside pocket of my duffel and took out a challenge coin, brass gone dull at the edges, a call sign stamped on one face, and a set of coordinates on the other that meant nothing to anyone who hadn't been on that net with us. Staff Sergeant Nate Kessler's coin. He'd handed it to me himself. 3 weeks before the rotation that killed him in a vehicle accident, on a supply road that had nothing to do with any operation either of us, had worked the kind of death that doesn't come with a highlight reel or a folded flag ceremony anybody outside the unit ever hears about, just a name added to a list and a coin that outlived him by 6 years and counting. I turned it over twice in the dark, the way I did most nights, and set it on the workbench beside the cot instead of back in the bag, because some part of me had decided, without asking the rest of me first, that it belonged out in the open on a weekend built around who got to claim which version of service. Then I called Ray on the line we'd used for a decade of nothing important, and twice, for the things that mattered more than either of us had wanted to say out loud at the time. Delgado, groggy television noise somewhere behind him. It's Dana, a pause, a rustle, the TV going quiet. It's 11:40 on a Friday, Dana. This better not be about your brother's charity gala. It's about my brother's charity gala. He sighed the sigh of a man who'd known me long enough to already suspect he'd help before he'd agreed to anything. Go ahead, I need eyes on a name, nothing classified. Nothing you'd have to explain to anybody with a clipboard and a security clearance question. Public record only. Whose name Derek? Major Derek Ashworth. I need his assignment history for spring of 2019. Just the unclassified postings, anything that would have made it into a base newspaper, a public affairs release, anything with his name in it that a reporter could have printed without a review. Another pause, longer this time, the kind Ray used when he was deciding how much of the question he wanted to ask out loud. "That's your brother, Dana. I know whose brother he is. I'm not touching anything with a caveat on it, not even for you. Not even for him. Wouldn't ask you to. I know you wouldn't." Something in his voice eased, just slightly. "That's the only reason I'm still on this call, instead of hanging up on you. I'll pull base archive papers in the morning. Public library microfilm has half of them digitized now, believe it or not. Give me till noon." I hung up and sat there a while longer on the edge of the cot, the dead radio's cracked dial glinting faintly under the bare bulb overhead. And let the cold do the one thing cold is actually good for keeping a person honest about what she's feeling instead of what she's performing. Brooke had her clipboard out again by 7:30 the next morning, moving through the house with the brisk, cheerful violence of a woman running a production. The annual muster, the reunion my father's old signal battalion had held every September for 3 decades, half memorial and half informal networking had, in the 2 years since my father's diagnosis, quietly become something else under Derek and Brooke's management, the launch platform for the Ashworth Valor Foundation, complete with a donor reception, a keynote slot, and, apparently, a dedication ceremony that evening for some song called The Wall of Valor. "Dana, can you move the folding chairs out to the barn? We need the porch clear for the photographer." I moved the chairs. 40 of them, stacked and carried 2 at a time, across a lawn still wet with dew, while inside the kitchen window I could see papers fanned across the dining table, foundation letterhead, a donor list with dollar figures I wasn't supposed to see, a printed run of show for the evening ceremony, and beside all of it, half covered by somebody's coffee mug, a property document with my father's signature line still blank at the bottom. "Stay out of my office, Dana," Derek said, materializing in the kitchen doorway before I'd made it 3 steps toward the table, a coffee mug of his own in hand. Voice pleasant enough that anyone watching from the yard would have seen nothing but 2 siblings exchanging a normal sentence. "Wasn't in it, you were looking. Chairs are in the barn now." I said it and kept walking, because there is a version of this argument that goes somewhere, and there is a version that goes nowhere, and I had spent 20 years learning to tell the difference between the two before I opened my mouth. Behind me I heard Brooke's voice drop low, the register she used when she wanted a conversation contained to 2 people instead of the whole kitchen, something with the word pension in it, something with the word deed. Derek's answer was too quiet to catch, which told me more than catching it would have. My father was on the porch swing when I came back around, a blanket over his knees despite a morning that didn't call for one, watching a hummingbird feeder that had gone empty sometime around the 4th of July and never gotten refilled. "Dana," he said, and for one clean second his eyes were completely present the way they used to be when he ran a battalion instead of forgetting, some mornings, what year it was. "You look tired." "I'm all right, Dad. Derek says you're not doing well. Says you never really recovered from whatever it was you did before you retired." He frowned, the clarity already starting to slide, the way a picture slides out of focus when someone bumps the tripod. "What was it you did again? Remind me." "Communications work." "That's right, communications." He repeated it the way a man repeats a phrase somebody else handed him, rather than one he actually remembers living. "Derek explains it to me sometimes. Says you mostly kept the phones running back home while the real work happened overseas." I sat down next to him on the swing and let it creak between us for a while, and I didn't correct any of it. "Not yet. There's a particular kind of discipline required to sit beside your own father while somebody else's version of your life gets handed to him in small, plausible pieces, 1 sentence at a time, while he's too tired most days to check anybody's math, including his own." "I used to like watching the hummingbirds with you," I said instead. "When I was a kid, did you?" He smiled, unmoored but warm. "I don't remember that, but I believe you." That was the whole conversation. It was also, I would come to understand later that weekend. The truest thing anybody said to me for 2 straight days. By midday, Cole found me recoiling an extension cord that didn't need recoiling, which is what a person does with her hands when the rest of her is somewhere else entirely. "You're really gonna sleep out here the whole weekend?" Shed's fine. He sat down on an overturned bucket without being invited, which I took as a compliment, phone in hand but screen dark for once, which I took as a bigger one. "Dad says you used to, like, run cable for base housing or something." "Is that even true?" "Something like that. That's kind of a letdown, not gonna lie. Everybody talks about your job like it's this big sad mystery, and it turns out it's just Wi-Fi installation. People believe the version that's easiest to say out loud at a barbecue." He picked at a loose thread on his jeans, working it back and forth without unraveling it, the way kids do when they're building up to a real question underneath a fake one. "I'm signing tomorrow," he said finally, "delayed entry program. Recruiters coming by after the ceremony tonight. Actually, Mom set it up to be like a whole thing. Everybody keeps telling me stories about what it's gonna be like. Dad's stories, mostly. Some wars don't get a highlight reel." He looked up fast at that, like he'd expected something encouraging and gotten something true instead, and hadn't decided yet which one he wanted more. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Means the parts that actually matter usually don't make good speeches." He was quiet a second, turning that over the way you turn over a rock to see what's underneath it. Dad's speech tonight, the Wall of Valor thing, Mom's had him rehearsing it for like a week. There's a line in it he keeps stumbling on, like on purpose, something about a night convoy. He does this thing with his jaw before he says it, like it tastes wrong in his mouth. I heard the line already, preview last night at dinner. "You have?" His frown deepened into something closer to suspicion, a teenager's particular flavor of it, the kind that surfaces the moment he notices an adult withholding something genuinely interesting. "You know something," he said. "You've known something since you walked in the door yesterday." I didn't confirm or deny it directly. Some doors you don't open for somebody until they're standing close enough to the frame to walk through it on their own legs, on their own reasons, and not because an aunt handed it to them like a prop. "Ask your mother where the printer tray is," I said instead. "See what's sitting in it that maybe shouldn't still be there." He frowned at me, confused, but he got up off the bucket anyway and headed back toward the house, and I let him go without another word, because that was the whole point. It cost me something to do it that way. 20 years of not being the one who talks doesn't switch off just because the silence has started working against the people you'd actually cross a room for. I told myself it was discipline. Some of it probably was. Through the kitchen window on my way back to the barn, I caught Brooke on her cell phone, voice too low to carry, one finger tapping the edge of the property document like she was counting down to something. Derek stood beside her with his own phone to his ear, nodding along to whatever the other end of the line was telling him. Neither of them looked up. Whatever clock they were running, it had started moving faster than mine. Not long after lunch, I heard them meeting before I saw it. Brooke's voice pitched into that careful gentleness people use when they want a room to agree with them before it's finished thinking. By the time I came in from the barn, the property document had moved from under the coffee mug to the center of the table, uncapped pen laid across it at an angle designed to look casual. "Dad, it's just a formality," Derek was saying, one hand resting on our father's shoulder, the other sliding the paper an inch closer. "The foundation needs the northern acreage listed as a donated asset for the tax filing. You're not losing anything, you're just making it official. Making sure it's protected." My father squinted at the page the way he squinted at most paperwork now, trying to find a foothold in language that used to be second nature to him. "This says power of attorney. That's standard boilerplate, Dad." "For the notary. I need to read it first." 4 words. Not mine, my father's. And for a second the old cadence was back in his voice, the flat command register of a man who had signed off on things a great deal more consequential than a Virginia property filing. Derek's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on his shoulder. There's really no need. We can walk you through it verbally. It'll save time before the ceremony. I need to read it first, I said, stepping into the room, and picked the document up off the table before either of them could close the 4 feet of air between the pen and my father's hand. Derek's hand closed around my wrist before I'd taken a full step back, fingers hooking under the bone the way you grab something you expect to let go on reflex. 20 years of close quarters signals work builds its own kind of muscle memory, quieter than the infantry kind, but no less durable. I turned my forearm into the thin side of his grip, dropped my elbow below the line of his balance. And the hold that was supposed to cost me the document simply wasn't there anymore. He stumbled half a step into the space where my hand had been, caught himself on the table edge, and straightened his jacket like nothing had happened, because that was what he always did with anything he couldn't win, outright. Brooke's smile didn't move, but something behind it did. This doesn't concern you, Dana. He's my father. 3 words. I kept my eyes on the page, a durable power of attorney over financial and property decisions, broad enough to cover the northern acreage, narrow enough in its language to make clear somebody had paid a lawyer to write it exactly this vague on purpose. This isn't a donation form. This transfers decision authority. You're not a lawyer. No. I read operational documents for 20 years for a living. I know when language is built to be misunderstood. Cole had appeared in the doorway at some point without anyone noticing, phone forgotten in his hand, watching his father's face do something none of us had seen it do, before a flicker of something closer to fear than irritation. We'll finish this after the ceremony, Derek said finally. Already recalculating. Tonight's a big night. Let's not make it about paperwork. He took the document back from me with a hand that wasn't quite as steady as his voice, and folded it once. And I let him, because a ticking clock only works if you let the other side believe they're still the one holding it. The day's small cruelties compounded through the afternoon, the way they always do at these things. Never one clean blow, just a dozen glancing ones, delivered with a smile so nobody at the reception could ever quite name what had happened. I was asked to help unload the catering truck. I was asked to keep an eye on the coolers so the ice didn't melt before the guests arrived. When the professional photographer arranged a family portrait, on the porch steps Derek, Brooke, Cole, my father in his good uniform jacket, nobody called my name for it, and when I stepped into frame anyway out of simple stubbornness, Brooke redirected the shot with a laugh that had teeth in it. Let's keep this one to the immediate family, Dana. We'll get you in some candids later. I stood off to the side in the same gray jacket I'd have on that evening, no rank, no unit patch, nothing on the shoulders at all. Because I'd left all of that folded in a box 2 years ago, along with the rest of a career I wasn't allowed to talk about, even now that it was over. I watched Derek adjust his medals for the camera, each one catching the afternoon light exactly the way he wanted it to. None of it would have made a story anyone could point to afterward. That was the whole design of it. But by the time the light started going gold over the fence line, I'd stopped waiting to be led into the picture and started deciding, instead, what picture I actually needed standing by nightfall. Brooke found me a few minutes later on the porch steps, sorting through a box of items she'd apparently decided belonged to a donation pile: old jackets, a box of my father's paperback westerns, and, sitting loose on top where I must have set it down and forgotten it after the shed the night before, Nate Kessler's coin. Is this yours? She turned it over between 2 fingers without much interest, reading the coordinates stamped into the brass like a phone number that had gone out of service. It's not worth anything, is it? We're doing a donation run to the thrift store in town if you want to just toss it in. That's not mine to give away, and it's not yours to ask about. 7 words. flat, and something in my voice must have carried more than I meant it to, because Brooke actually took half a step back, coin still pinched between her fingers like she'd forgotten she was holding it. "I was just tidying," she said, and set it down on the porch rail instead of handing it to me directly, which was its own small, deliberate cruelty, making me cross the distance to reclaim it myself, in front of the photographer, in front of the board members, drifting past with their lemonade. I crossed the distance. I picked it up. I put it back in my pocket, where it should have stayed the whole time, and I didn't say anything else, because there is a version of that conversation that goes somewhere useful. And a version that just spends ammunition I intended to use later that evening instead. I thought about the shed radio afterward. Cracked dial, dead battery, cold as the concrete floor it sat on. And still, somehow, the most honest object on that entire property until I was starting to suspect it would have some competition by nightfall. Late that afternoon, Ray's message came through 40 minutes before I needed to be dresslet, and standing on that lawn, a scanned page from an old Kaiserslautern Herald Post archive, digitized by some regional library grant nobody had thought to worry about, dated April 2019, Maj. D. Ashworth briefs visiting NATO logistics delegation. Stuttgart liaison office with a photograph, grainy but unmistakable, of my brother in a conference room with fluorescent lighting and a whiteboard behind him. Nowhere near a convoy. Nowhere near a desert. Nowhere near anything that could be mistaken for the operation he'd described at dinner the night before. Stuttgart, not the Sahel. Same month, same week Derek claimed to have made his solo call in the dark. Public record. A base newspaper caption freely available, nothing classified. Nothing borrowed from anyone's clearance. Nothing that needed explaining to anybody above a pay grade I no longer held, and that, for the first time all weekend, worked entirely in my favor. I didn't need permission to know what a library already knew. Otis Reyes called 2 minutes after that without so much as a hello. "She's coming, confirmed an hour ago." General Cho's driver called my cell personally to ask about parking. "She'll be at the dedication at 1900 sharp." A pause, and I could hear the smile in it even over the phone. "Derek thinks it's for him. Told half the board it's a personal favor from an old mentor." "Let him think it a little longer. You sound exactly like your father used to," right before he walked into a room that thought it already knew how the meeting was going to go. "I'll take that as a compliment, Otis." It was one. A pause. "One more thing, I forwarded your question about the assignment history to a JAG contact of mine last week. Told him it was routine due diligence for the Foundation's own compliance file, nothing pointed at anybody. Figured it couldn't hurt to have someone with a badge, already looking at the paperwork before tonight. Didn't ask you to do that either, I know. That's twice now." I hung up and looked at the radio in the corner one last time before I changed into my dress clothes for this evening plain. No insignia, nothing on the shoulders. Somewhere under all that dust and dead battery acid, the dial still turned, if you gave it enough patience to remember what it was built for. I gave it one slow crank, out of habit more than hope, and got nothing back but a thin, faithful hiss of static, the one honest sound on the entire property. The real night hadn't looked anything like Derek's version, and it had never needed to. There'd been no convoy under my command, no lone dark ride into anything. There had been a windowless room 11 time zones from where the trucks were actually moving, 3 screens of intercepted traffic, a headset digging a groove into my ear by hour 4, and a patrol of soldiers I never met and never would. Rolling down a road toward a position our signals told us, with about 90 seconds of warning, had been compromised. I made a call that night too, not a brave one, not a cinematic one, just the correct one, made on time, based on work that had taken years to get good enough at to be trusted with. The patrol rerouted, nobody on that convoy ever knew my name, and nobody needed to. That was the job. The job was built entirely out of things nobody claps for, because clapping requires an audience, and the whole point of the work was that there wasn't supposed to be one. Derek's version had cold and dark and radio silence, all the textures of danger without any of its actual mechanism. Mine had fluorescent light and stale coffee, and the low electric hum of climate control keeping the servers from overheating, and it had cost me, in its own way, just as much a particular loneliness that comes from doing something that mattered and never once being permitted to say so. Not at a dinner table, not at a promotion board, not even, most nights, inside my own head. Because saying it out loud only made the silence around it heavier. Derek had taken the outer shape of that night and filled it with the only kind of substance he understood: applause. I set the radio dial back to 0 and went inside to get dressed. They'd built a low wooden platform near the old oak, draped in bunting, a banner strung across the front reading Ashworth Valor Foundation honoring service, building legacy in letters large enough to photograph from the road. 40, maybe 50 people stood scattered across the lawn in the long gold light of early evening, plastic cups of lemonade and iced tea sweating in their hands, the smell of a smoked brisket drifting over from the catering tent. Somebody's toddler shrieking with laughter near the fence line. Derek stood at the podium in his dress uniform, medals aligned, note cards in hand that Brooke had printed and highlighted for him that morning. No satellite window for another 6 hours, he was saying, voice pitched for the back row, warm and rehearsed. Cold, dark, radio silence the whole ride in. I made the call myself because that's what leadership actually means when nobody's watching. That's the legacy this family was built on, and it's the legacy I want the Ashworth Valor Foundation to carry forward for every family that's given what ours has given. Applause, warm and generous. My father, seated in a folding chair in the front row in his good uniform jacket, clapped along a beat behind everyone else, uncertain but willing, the way he clapped at most things, now trusting the room to tell him when something deserved it. Derek's eyes drifted past the crowd, toward the gravel driveway, and I watched his face do something I recognized instantly, because I'd grown up across the dinner table from that exact expression, the private, settling satisfaction of a man who believes the last piece of a plan is arriving precisely on schedule. Gravel crunched. A black SUV came up the drive and parked at an angle that suggested whoever was driving it had done this kind of arrival before. That's an honor I genuinely wasn't expecting tonight, Derek said into the microphone, voice climbing warm and public, already composing the sentence he planned to repeat for years. I understand we have a very special guest joining us this evening. The SUV doors opened. 2 figures crossed the grass, one in Army combat uniform with a Psi-D shield clipped visibly to his belt, moving at an unhurried, deliberate pace that had nothing casual in it despite the calm of it, the other in service dress, a single star on each shoulder, walking with the unhurried economy of someone who has never once needed to rush in order to be taken seriously. "Where is Lieutenant Colonel Ashworth?" Brigadier General Renata Cho asked, scanning the crowd, addressing the whole lawn and nobody in particular. Derek's smile held for exactly 1 second longer than it should have. "Lieutenant Colonel," Derek repeated, thrown for half a second, already reaching for the closest rank he could attach to the family name. "My father's the colonel here, ma'am. If it's the reunion committee you're looking for." "I'm not looking for a colonel." General Cho's gaze moved past him, past the podium, past the banner with its careful capital letters, and found me standing near the back of the crowd in a plain gray jacket with nothing at all on the shoulders. "I'm looking for Dana." The crowd did the thing crowds do when they sense the shape of an evening, changing before they can name why the murmurs collapsed into silence in stages. Like a held breath passed hand to hand across 50 people at once. General Cho crossed the lawn without hurrying. She stopped in front of me, came to attention on the grass in her polished shoes, and rendered a salute I hadn't received since my own retirement ceremony 2 years earlier, crisp, unhurried. with no audience it needed to perform for, except the one person standing in front of her. "Ma'am," she said. "It's an honor," I returned it. My hand found the motion faster than the rest of me expected it to, muscle memory outrunning the 2 years I'd spent trying to set it down. Behind her, CID Special Agent Louis Ortega had already crossed to Derek's side, speaking low, unfolding a printed page and holding it where Derek and only Derek could see it clearly. 2 columns of text, side by side, identical down to the punctuation. I watched my brother's face empty out in real time, the way a room empties when someone finally forces open a window that's been painted shut for years and the pressure equalizes all at once. "Major Ashworth," Ortega said, his voice pitched to Carrie now, "I'm going to need you to step away from the podium. There's obviously some kind of misunderstanding here." "Sir, the language in tonight's remarks matches, word for word, an after-action summary authored in 2019 by Lieutenant Colonel Dana Ashworth. We also have documentation placing you in Stuttgart during the operational window described in that speech. I'll need you to accompany me to answer questions regarding potential violations of Article 107 and Article 133. This is a private family event. You can't just..." Derek's eyes cut to me for half a second, calculating even now. "This is my sister, ma'am. She spent 20 years watching me get the credit for a life she thinks should have been hers. Ask her why she's really standing there. It's an open reception advertising a federally registered nonprofit, sir, with your remarks live-streamed on the Foundation's own donor page as of 6 minutes ago. It's not private, and I can." Somewhere near the back, one of the board members from Charlotte had already taken out her phone, not to record, but to quietly close the livestream tab, a full 60 seconds too late to matter. Brooke's clipboard hit the grass. Nobody moved to pick it up. The board members had gone very still near the lemonade table, the stillness of people mentally calculating how quickly they could locate their car keys. General Cho hadn't moved from where she stood facing me, but her voice carried anyway, pitched for the whole lawn without seeming to try. "For what it's worth, Colonel Ashworth's after-action summary from that rotation is part of the reason a partner nation resupply route is still in regular use today. I read it during my own qualification review. I'd know those sentences anywhere I've quoted them myself, in briefings, more than once." She looked past me, toward Derek, without raising her voice at all. I don't take it well when someone borrows a fellow officer's service to build a stage for himself. Nobody in this uniform should. Cole stood at the edge of the platform, and for the first time all weekend he wasn't looking at his phone at all. He walked toward his grandfather's chair instead, reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a little sheet of paper, a printer draft. Derek's handwriting crossed through the same sentence twice in the margin. A note scrawled beside it that read in full, "Make this sound more like combat." "I found this in the printer tray last week," Cole said, his voice unsteady but carrying anyway. "I didn't understand what it meant until about an hour ago." He handed it directly to Agent Ortega without being asked, without looking at either of his parents first, which was, I understood even in that moment, the more expensive choice. My father looked up from his folding chair, and for a long moment his eyes were entirely clear again, clearer, maybe, than they'd been in a year. "Dana," he said, "the night convoy, the one in the story tonight. That was you, wasn't it?" He wasn't asking so much as finally allowing himself to say something he'd apparently been carrying, half buried, for longer than any of us had realized. I think some part of me always knew. I just forgot how to say it out loud. "Yes, sir," 2 words, it was all I had room for right then. He reached up, slower than regulation, a little crooked with age, and brought his hand to his brow in a salute that would never pass an inspection and meant more to me than the general's crisp one had. I held mine until he lowered his. By Monday morning, the Foundation's accounts were frozen, pending the CD review donor funds that had quietly covered 2 mortgage payments on the farm's northern acreage. funneled through a line item nobody on the board had ever asked to see itemized. The property transfer paperwork on the dining room table never got my father's signature. The estate attorney, once informed of the investigation, declined to notarize anything further until his capacity to consent was formally addressed. It wasn't justice shaped like a courtroom, not yet. It didn't need to be, not that morning. Otis had coffee waiting when I came in, poured before I asked. Sat down at the table where the property document had sat the day before, now nowhere in sight. Attorney called at 7. Wants your father evaluated before anybody touches that paperwork again. I gave her the number. He studied me over his cup. 2 days and you never once raised your voice. Didn't need to. He just nodded the nod of a man who'd run 30 years of memorials and knew exactly how rare that was. Brooke had taken Cole's things and left for her sister's the night before. Cole had asked to stay one more morning, which was how I found him waiting by my truck. Derek was upstairs with a JAG officer on speakerphone, behind a door I had no interest in opening. I moved my cot out of the shed before breakfast, folded the blanket back over the old field radio the way I'd found it, and gave the dial one last slow turn out of habit. Static filled the small cold space, faint and steady, the only honest voice in that house, or on that property, for 2 straight days. Cole found me loading my bag into the truck, hood up against the morning chill, hands jammed in his pockets. "Ma'am," he said the first time he'd ever called me that, and it landed harder than I expected. "Permission to walk with you? Before you go?" 6 words, and they weren't mine, but they were exactly the kind I would have chosen for him. Permission granted. We walked the fence line in silence, past the empty hummingbird feeder, past the platform, still strung with bunting, the banner sagging where the dew had gotten into the paper. "I still want to sign up," he said finally, not looking at me. "The delayed entry thing, is that stupid after all this?" No. Everybody's version of it turned out to be a lie, though. Dad's, at least. His lie doesn't make the thing itself a lie. He thought about that for a while. What was it really like? The convoy thing. Whatever actually happened that night that he stole. I looked at him for a moment, really looked the way you look at someone you've decided is finally old enough for the true version instead of the easy one. "Cold," I said, "quiet, longer than anybody tells you it's going to be." And it mattered more because nobody was there to clap for it. He nodded, slowly, like he was filing that away. We reached the gate at the far end of the property, where the morning light came through clean for the first time all weekend. I put my bag in the truck bed and turned back to him. "Some wars don't get a highlight reel," I said again, the same 9 words from 2 days earlier, except this time he didn't look confused by them at all. "Yeah," he said, "I think I finally get what that means." I took out Nate Kessler's coin and turned it over once in the morning light so he could see both faces of it, the call sign, the coordinates that meant nothing to anyone outside a room, that no longer existed. Friend of mine carried this. Didn't come home, kept strange things. Didn't come home from a rotation that never made it into anybody's speech because there wasn't a version of it that would have sounded good at a podium. I closed his hand around it before he could ask whether he was allowed to hold it. "Keep it wherever you're going. Not because it's lucky. Because some things are worth carrying, even when nobody's watching you carry them." My phone buzzed once as I loaded the last bag. A text from Ray. "Heard it went about as clean as these things ever go. Told you the library card would come in handy one day." I typed back 3 words, "Owe you coffee," and put the phone away before Cole could ask who it was. He looked down at it a moment, then back up at me, and didn't say anything else, which was, for a 17-year-old, its own kind of static discipline. I got in the truck. In the rearview mirror, he was still standing at the gate. When I pulled out onto the gravel road, one hand raised, not quite a wave, not quite a salute, something honest caught somewhere in between the two, which, all things considered, was about the most any of us had managed to offer each other all weekend.